All right, we have today a discussion on LBC, which is like a British talk radio, center left, something like that. This is from 9 months ago. Let's check it
Would have
out.
to do when they lose the election
When, as
next
opposed to
year,
if.
yes, is to look at the how they manage economies, because the history of the Labour Party is they get into power, they survive on the coattails of the previous Conservative government for 1 or 2 years, so things look quite good, and then their spending gets out of control, the economy tanks, they lose the election, and
The economy
unemployment
has already
rises.
tanked.
See,
And then,
I'm
and then we
thinking
have to
about
get
what's
into
happened
power
over
and
the
take
last few
difficult
years.
decision.
Yeah, hang on. 13 years, and there are going to be very few people who can look you in the face on the doorstep in Bognor and say, I'm better off than I was in 2010.
We have been through some major crises. There's no question about that. COVID was a once-in-a-century crisis affecting this country and the world. We borrowed 450...
But COVID is the new winter of discontent, is it?
Well, we borrowed £450 billion, and we were able to borrow it because of the stewardship of the economy leading up to that point after the banking crisis. And the capital markets were confident enough to lend us £450 billion.
So I legitimately know absolutely nothing about British politics. Obviously, this guy is a partisan hack. Usually what happens in Western democracies, and I'm sensing that England is not the exception, is that you have broad unanimity between all the major political parties, in this case Labour and the Tories, and there's only superficial differences in policy. The real difference is in the rhetoric, but when it comes to what they actually do when they're in power, they're all pretty much in lockstep.
You know they're going to get it back. But because of that,
They weren't after Truss's budget in September, they were.
Well, I'm not saying that was a great triumph, but what I am saying is that Rishi Sunak is there, Jeremy Hunt is there, they're stabilising the economy. We did have the fastest growth in the G7 in 2021
But you don't now.
and 2022.
We've got the lowest now.
No, but we will recover. All the hallmarks, all the fundamentals are there in place. We've got low unemployment, we've got inflation coming down, we've got a competent government.
Inflation went up last month.
Yes, but it's forecast by the OBR to be 2.9% in the fourth quarter of this
Do
year.
you seriously believe that's going to happen?
I do, provided, of course, we don't give in to pay settlements where people are demanding 35% pay increases. Of course, that would blow.
These guys are good. You can tell that this is the major leagues of British politics. All right, let's just get a little primer here for those of us, like myself, who know nothing about British politics. Conservatives been in power since 2010. Okay, so right here, looks like in real terms they've managed to control government spending since 2010. There was a downward trend until 2020. Obviously, COVID happened. Oh, actually, this is just till 2014. That was just predicted. So this article, I think, was written in 2014. This is kind of a cool infographic which shows government spending as a percentage of GDP, and then it breaks it down by department. So defense spending 1952 super high, and then just steadily decreasing. I like that. I think that's smart. And then you've got, all this other stuff: education, welfare, health, pensions. Okay, so here's 2010, and total aggregate government spending steadily decreasing as a percentage of GDP. Looks like 43 to 39, so 4% points. Then way up to 48, 51, and then 44 rather. So I'd still rather see some reduction in spending in absolute terms, but just based off that limited information, it looks like They made some sensible fiscal reforms.
Inflation apart, but the point about we were discussing the Labour Party, I just think if the Labour Party lose the election, they've got to look at how they manage economies, because their history, throughout the history of the Labour Party, is the damage they do to the British economy.
Under the Blair government, the economy was well managed. I mean, then the financial crash came. I mean, we can argue about sort of things that we might have done differently, but it generally was well managed. The financial crash came along. Gordon Brown was seen by everybody outside this country as almost the saviour of the world economy. It doesn't really...
All right, let's take a look at Blair's record. So Blair, we're looking at 97, 32.4 to 2007, 35.5. Pretty large increase in government spending as a percentage of GDP. I guess the defining moment of the Blair prime ministership would be here in 2001, invasion of Iraq, and you see how government spending goes up steadily. I believe England was pretty heavily involved, and widespread opposition to the invasion among Blair's own party. So my quick analysis of Blair is that he would have been pretty solid except for the war in Iraq. That was his huge mistake. Really started to run up the government spending. Otherwise, seems like he was sort of an advocate of fiscal discipline. And then it looks like the guy that followed him, Gordon Brown, was just a huge mistake. One that was quickly rectified by the voters. Hopefully we hear from Corbyn. I want to hear from Corbyn.
Really fit into
it
your
does,
narrative.
because, there was the banking crash, of course, but also the way they had spent during that period meant that when we came into office in 2010, we had a budget deficit, an annual budget deficit of £156 billion
What
a
is it
year.
now?
It's
A lot more.
We have been through the COVID crisis and we're trying to deal with that. But that was 11% of GDP that we were spending in each year. We had to bring that down. And because of that, we were able to borrow during the COVID crisis.
Okay. Right, let's repeat the question. If the Starmer project fails and he doesn't win the general election, what next for Labour, Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, before I say that, just Nick, I wonder which planet you're on at the moment, mate. Inflation, well over 12%. Food inflation, much more. More food banks in this country than branches
Jeremy,
of
you're taking your
McDonald's.
pen right
Sorry,
into the
it's a very good pen, given to me by a trade union. You're suggesting that somehow the economy is doing well. Well, if you ask anyone who is worse off than they were 10 years ago, ask anyone like a teacher or a rail worker, a mail worker, what's happened to their wages, they won't be very, very happy. And you cannot say that wages have caused this inflation, because wages have actually fallen over the last 10 years. And if you actually got round the table with all the unions involved in the current disputes and paid them properly, you would actually have more money being spent in the economy, which would help investment anyway, and you would have a lot less poverty around and a lot less people claiming universal credit or top-ups in order to get through. Now, for the Labour Party, I think the important thing is to offer a...
Socialism is so incredibly compelling. I can see why it seduced so many people in the 20th century. Not only does it have an easy answer for every problem, it crafts this compelling narrative about the valiant struggle of the oppressed working class against the evil capitalist exploiters, the government cruelly pursuing the narrow class interests of the capitalists at the expense of the workers. The reality is that the market economy is a harmonious place where individuals are working towards their mutual betterment. But this is not an intuitive truth. Or maybe it is, but all of the rhetoric makes it harder to see.
And I saw an analysis in the I-paper last week which said one of the problems was many of the public don't fully understand what Labour's economic strategy is, because they're so busy presenting themselves as being very good at managing the economy. Surely we've got to look at the structural problems. The structural problems are historic lack of investment. Structural problems are historic lack of training, historic problems of underpayment of teachers and medical workers, many of whom, if they can, emigrate or they go and do something else, even though they've been trained at public expense.
You put forward that case in 2019.
I put forward that case in
and
2019.
lost.
Of course we lost the election. I fully understand that, but there are many reasons, one of which was issues around Brexit, I'm sure you'd understand. But individually, interestingly, the policies, particularly ones on public ownership of mail, rail, water and energy, were actually all publicly supported and still are.
This is another really strong socialist argument. Why not just have crown corporations? Especially when it comes to essential industries, you can have fair pricing. You're not taking advantage of anybody. You don't have to pay for the profit motive. And that's actually how my grandfather described socialism to me. He was an ardent socialist, Polish emigre, hardcore NDP supporter, which is like Canada's Labour, and an advocate, left-wing policies, his whole life, farmer, hardworking man. Anyway, he said to me, look, in modern large corporations, the owners, they're not even the ones that run the day-to-day operations, right? You've got managers, a managerial class that makes all the decisions. The owners, they just sit there and they have their ownership. They're not even involved. They just own the stocks and they get the profits. So why not have the people own the companies, the state, the public? And it's a very, very attractive idea. But what it neglects is the role of entrepreneurship in the market economy. So the entrepreneur is an interested risk taker. And one of the reasons why CEOs get rewarded with stock options is so that they have skin in the game. So I don't think you can simply have the public as owners, because that ignores the role of the owner-operator, which is still present even in large firms, although the ownership share wouldn't be total. When Ludwig von Mises posed his calculation problem as one of the reasons why socialism wouldn't work, the popular answer at the time, and even still today, was market socialism. We'll have markets, but everything will be owned by the people or the state. But the problem is that doesn't work. You can't just play market. You need the activities of interested parties buying and selling. That's how prices are discovered. In a modern economy, there are millions of different prices to set, and the only way to discover what those prices are is to actually have a market. And the other thing is, what advocates of crown corporations are usually really asking for isn't just a crown corporation, isn't just a government-run business, but a state monopoly on a particular industry. So then you don't have the forces of market competition working to ensure quality and affordability, and inevitably the organization is going to become bloated and inefficient. That's just the nature of state monopolies. Without market competition, there's no incentive towards efficiency, towards quality. And decisions become made on a political basis instead of an economic one.
Much clearer alternative in the election.
Is it also down to the fact that, there was a YouGov survey at the weekend which showed that undecided voters, who, as you well know, they decide elections generally, they much prefer Rishi Sunak to Keir Starmer. Now, what do you put that down to?
I think he puts himself across as being was new, of course, which is what he is, but also he probably trying to present himself as being financially and politically competent. I don't think he is, but it's an image that has been very carefully constructed over the last couple of months. But we are very early into his premiership.
Can I help?
I wouldn't know you can help me in a moment.
No, hang on a second. Hang on, because you just said you didn't think Keir Starmer was financially or politically competent.
No, I didn't say that.
You
I said
did say that.
No, I said the presentation of Sunak was that he was financially competent.
Right.
That's what I said.
I heard you to say that you didn't think Keir Starmer was financially or politically competent.
That is not.
Well, I'm glad to have given you the opportunity to clear that up, because was I alone in hearing that?
He's already been cancelled by Keir.
I thought that was going to be a great newsline, Jeremy. You've let me down.
I'm sorry to let you down on this. But my fundamental point is there has to be a real alternative offered. And if there isn't a real alternative offered, people go to the status quo. This is what they know.
A lot of your supporters and friends are really angry with Keir Starmer for effectively ditching all the promises that he made when he succeeded you, because his manifesto at that time, and there were 10 pledges, and they were all ones which I think you could have probably bought into.
They were all taken from the 17 and 19
and they've all
manifestos. All those 10 pledges were, and I was quite relieved, actually. Well, that's all right. My work has not been in vain, having got those two manifestos
But now you think
agreed
it has
by the
been?
party. Well, if we run away from what I believe were fundamental and reasonable policies to be offered to the British people. I mean, I was interviewed during the 2019 election by a Swedish journalist. He comes into my office, jumps in and says, "Right, Mr. Corbyn, tell me all about your extreme manifesto." So I sort of gave him a 2 or 3 minute description of what was in the policies. And he said, "Was that it?"